Evan didn't know it yet, but the tiny creature he carried home that freezing night would soon reveal a truth that shattered everything he believed about the world and about himself. A truth that would make him question whether he had saved a life or unleashed something far more dangerous. And how all this happened? Let's start from the beginning. Evan had always believed he understood loneliness, until the night he found it staring back at him through a pair of trembling, tear-filled eyes on the side of a cold, deserted road. The world was silent, wrapped in a harsh winter wind. When fate placed a tiny, helpless creature in his path, a creature that shouldn't have survived the night, yet somehow clung to life with a desperate will. I share new life stories here every day, and I would really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. The cry was so faint that at first Evan thought he had imagined it. It wasn't the sound of traffic or the whisper of leaves. It was softer, weaker, the sound of something begging not to die. He froze, breath fogging in the air, and listened again. There it was, a tiny whimper. He followed it to a patch of overgrown grass near an old wooden fence. There, curled tightly into itself, was a puppy no bigger than his palm. Its fur was soaked, its body shaking so violently he could see the tremors. Evan crouched slowly. "Hey there." "It's okay," he whispered, unsure if it could even hear him. When he extended his hand, the creature lifted its head with a weak effort. Their eyes met, and something inside those small, glossy eyes hit him like a wave. Fear. Yes, but also intelligence. Awareness? He couldn't quite name it. But the moment their gazes locked, he felt something unexpected: connection. The puppy pressed its cold nose to his palm. It was so fragile that Evan felt as though he was holding a heartbeat more than a body. Without thinking, without hesitation, he scooped the tiny creature into his arms. "You're coming with me," he whispered. Though he didn't fully understand why it felt like the right thing to say. The walk home felt strangely heavy. Every time Evan looked down, he saw the pup clinging to his jacket. Its tiny paw hooked onto his sleeve as if terrified he might let go. And something in that innocent gesture tugged at a part of Evan's heart he thought had died years ago. Inside the apartment, warmth wrapped around them. Evan gently placed the limp little body onto a blanket. The puppy's breathing was shallow, barely there, and Evan felt panic clawed his chest. He rushed to the kitchen, pulling together whatever he could: milk, bread, warmth. When he placed the bowl down, the puppy didn't move. Evan lowered himself to the floor and dipped his finger into the milk, bringing it to the pup's nose. Slowly, carefully, it lifted its head, a tiny lick, then another. Soon the little creature was drinking eagerly, its frail body fighting awake. Evan exhaled in relief. But then he noticed something strange in the dim light. The fur looked darker than he'd realized, almost black with a faint shimmer, like shadows shifting under the surface. And earlier, had its eyes really glowed, or had exhaustion played tricks on him? He rubbed his tired eyes. "I'm imagining things," he muttered. The puppy curled into the blanket, letting out the softest sigh. Evan carefully lifted it and placed it beside him on the couch. Instantly, the shaking stopped. It pressed itself against him, breathing slow and steady, as though his presence was the only thing keeping it alive. Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He didn't know the truth yet. He didn't know what this creature really was. But he would soon, and when he did, the world he knew would never be the same. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, warming the air just enough to gently nudge Evan awake. For a blissful second, he forgot about the previous night, the cold, the tiny creature, the strange glow he thought he had seen. But then he felt it. A small weight pressed against his cheek. Evan opened his eyes to find Shadow. The name had come to him naturally. Without effort, curled on his pillow, nestled so close that their noses were nearly touching. The tiny pup's fur shimmered faintly in the morning light, giving off a soft, smoky sheen. "Looks like you made yourself at home," Evan murmured. Shadow lifted his head, yawned softly, then nudged Evan's chin with his nose. The gesture shouldn't have meant much, but for some reason it did. It felt intentional, like gratitude. Or something deeper. Evan got up slowly, careful not to disturb the pup. But Shadow immediately followed, wobbling on tiny legs, yet somehow moving with surprising coordination. "Too much coordination?" "Hold on," Evan said, staring. "How did you get off the bed?" The bed was tall, far too tall for a puppy this small to climb down safely. Yet Shadow stood in the hallway, tail flicking with a quiet confidence that didn't match his size. Evan shook the thought away. "Maybe I didn't put you that high up." But the doubt lingered in the kitchen. Evan poured milk into a shallow bowl. Shadow patted over, not stumbling, not hesitating. Instead of diving in like most starving puppies, he approached slowly, sniffing first, examining every detail with unnerving precision. Then he began drinking, not messily, not with frantic hunger, but gently, controlled. Deliberate, Evan crouched down, eyebrows knitting. "You're different," he whispered. Shadow paused mid-sip, lifting his head to meet Evan's gaze. Those eyes still glossy, still innocent, held something more beneath the surface. Something thoughtful, sharp, a level of awareness that made Evan's breath catch for a moment. He forced a laugh. "Okay, Evan, you're reading too much into this." But he wasn't, and he knew it. The rest of the morning brought more questions as Evan scribbled notes in his journal, something he did only on the rare days he felt his mind buzzing with thoughts. His pen slipped from the table and rolled beneath the coffee stand. He reached down to grab it. But before he could, Shadow trotted forward, nudging the pen out with his tiny nose. He placed it neatly by Evan's foot, then sat down, tail curling around his body as if waiting for approval. Evan's heart froze. That's not normal. Shadow tilted his head, as though acknowledging the words. Evan swallowed hard. He couldn't shake the feeling any more the way Shadow watched him. The way he moved, the quiet intelligence burning behind those eyes. It didn't feel like just curiosity. It felt like recognition, like connection, like Shadow understood him far more than any animal should. Later that afternoon, Evan carried Shadow to the couch and turned on the TV, hoping to distract his swirling thoughts. The pup curled up beside him, paw pressed lightly against Evan's arm, the same gesture from the night before, a gesture that felt almost like a message. "I don't know what you are," Evan whispered, "but I'm glad you're here." Shadow let out a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a purr. Something in between. Something comforting. Evan smiled faintly. But the peace didn't last, as the sun dipped lower. Evan noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A faint shimmer. A flicker. Like light reflecting off glass. He turned. Shadow's eyes were open, glowing softly in the dim room, catching a light that didn't exist. It lasted only a heartbeat, then vanished as Shadow blinked. Evan's breath hitched. The room felt unnaturally quiet. Shadow slowly crawled into his lap, curling up again as though nothing had happened. Evan rested a shaky hand on the pup's back, unsure whether fear or awe pulsed stronger within him. "Okay," he whispered. "Something's happening, and I need to understand it." Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying a chill that didn't belong to the weather. And deep down, Evan felt this was only the beginning. The next few days passed in a strange, delicate balance. Evan tried to convince himself that Shadow's unusual behavior was just the imagination of a lonely man, suddenly responsible for a tiny life. He tried to tell himself the glow in those eyes was just the light, that the sudden bursts of agility were coincidence. He tried to believe he wasn't losing his mind, but the truth had a way of clawing back to the surface, despite the calm routines he forced himself into: morning walks, quiet meals, gentle playtime. Shadow continued doing things that made Evan's heart race for reasons he couldn't explain. Shadow knew when the phone was about to ring seconds before it vibrated. He moved with a grace no young puppy should have. He reacted to Evan's emotions before Evan fully felt them. But it wasn't until the night everything shattered that Evan finally admitted the truth. It was almost midnight when it began. Evan sat on the couch with Shadow tucked beside him, the glow of the TV flickering across the room. The world outside was quiet, the kind of stillness that made sound travel strangely far: the crack of a twig, the rustle of branches, the distant hum of a car. Shadow lifted his head. Evan didn't notice at first. The pup's ears twitched, body slowly rising from its curled position. His tail stiffened, fur along his spine lifting until it stood on end. A soft, rumbling growl vibrated through his tiny chest. Evan blinked, looking down. "Shadow, what's wrong?" Shadow didn't look at him. He stared at the door, not with fear, with warning. And then Evan heard it too. A metallic clang from outside the apartment hallway. Then another, followed by hushed voices. Evan froze. He muted the TV, heart thudding loudly in his ears. The entire world seemed to lean into the silence as he waited for the next sound. Shadow moved in front of him, tiny body, but posture sharp, focused, guarding. Evan swallowed. Okay. Maybe they're just neighbors. A crash slammed through the hallway, cutting him off. Not a neighbor, not an accident. Something hit the wall hard, enough to rattle the picture frames. Shadow growled deeper, no longer a puppy sound, but something that made the hair on the back of Evan's neck stand straight. Another voice hissed from the hallway. "Try the next door." Evan's blood turned cold. He reached for his phone, scrambling to dial 911. But before he could press the screen, boom, a heavy kick struck the door. Shadow leaped forward so quickly the blanket barely had time to fall off his body. His tiny paws planted firmly on the floor, teeth bared, eyes glowing faintly like twin embers in the dark room. Evan gasped. "Shadow, no, get back." But the pup didn't move. He stood between Evan and the threat, like a soldier guarding a king. Another kick. This time, the entire door shook, splinters cracking near the lock. Evan stumbled backward, heart hammering so loudly he could barely hear himself breathe. His mind raced in terror. Why his home? Why tonight? Who were they? The third kick broke the door open. It flew inward with a violent snap. Two men rushed inside wearing hooded jackets, faces hidden in the shadows. One held a crowbar, the other a sharp, glinting knife that caught the dim light from the TV. Evan froze. Shadow didn't. The tiny creature launched forward, a blur of black fur and furious motion. A snarl erupted from him, deeper and more powerful than anything Evan had ever heard. The sound echoed through the apartment like a warning from something far larger than his small frame. The man with the knife lunged, but Shadow was faster. He leaped high, teeth snapping inches from the man's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife with a cry of pain. It clattered across the floor, disappearing under the table. The second man swung the crowbar. Shadow dodged effortlessly, movements impossibly precise. He circled, growling, driving them back with a ferocity that seemed unnatural, almost otherworldly. The intruders stared in disbelief. "What is that thing?" One shouted. "Forget it, go, go." They scrambled away, stumbling over each other as they fled through the shattered doorway. Footsteps echoing down the hall until silence swallowed them whole. Shadow stood there, chest heaving, eyes still glowing. Then slowly, the glow faded. He turned back to Evan and limped into his trembling arms. Pressing his tiny head against Evan's chest, Evan sank to the floor, tears blurring his vision as he held the small creature that had just saved his life. "You saved me," he whispered. Voice breaking. Shadow let out a soft whimper, as if saying, "I always will." But Evan didn't yet understand this was only the first attack, and the world was about to reveal why. Shadow had come into his life. Evan didn't sleep at all that night. Not after the intruders fled. Not after Shadow collapsed into his arms with that quiet, exhausted whimper. Not after the police finally left, offering vague promises and shaking heads. He sat on the couch long after dawn broke. Shadow curled against him, breathing softly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But extraordinary didn't even begin to describe it. A pub, barely the size of Evan's forearm, had fought off two grown men. He had moved faster than Evan's eyes could follow. He had glowed. He had growled with a depth no small creature should possess. And yet, as Shadow slept peacefully, he looked innocent, fragile. Normal. Evan stroked the pup's fur gently, whispering into the quiet apartment. "What are you?" Shadow only snuggled closer. But the question burned in Evan's mind until he couldn't hold it inside. Anymore, he needed answers. By mid-morning, Evan wrapped Shadow in a soft blanket and carried him out to the car. The pup didn't resist. He simply rested his head against Evan's chest. Eyes half-lidded, but alert in that strange, unnerving way that suggested he understood far more than he should. "We're going to the vet," Evan murmured. "Just don't bite anyone, okay?" Shadow blinked slowly, as if agreeing. But when they arrived at Dr. Collins's clinic, things only grew stranger. The waiting room was crowded with barking dogs, hissing cats, nervous owners. But the moment Shadow entered, a heavy silence drifted through the space. A German shepherd, large and muscular, barked at Shadow from across the room. Shadow didn't flinch. He simply stared. Within moments, the shepherd whimpered and hid behind its owner's legs. A cat arched its back, hissed, then scrambled under a chair. Another small dog curled itself into a ball and refused to look up. People exchanged uneasy glances, whispering. Evan's cheeks warmed with embarrassment and fear. Shadow wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. He wasn't even doing anything. But animals felt something invisible, something powerful when Dr. Collins entered the room. Her smile faltered the second she saw the pup. "Oh," she breathed. "You brought him back." Evan nodded nervously. He stopped a break-in last night." Dr. Collins blinked. "He did what?" And so, for the first time, Evan told the truth. Not all of it. Not the glowing eyes. But the speed, the strength, the growl that shook the walls. Dr. Collins listened silently, her brow creasing deeper with every word. She motioned for him to follow her into the exam room. Shadow sat calmly on the metal table as she examined him ears, eyes, fur, paws. But her frown only deepened. "Evan, his physiology is unusual. What does that mean?" She hesitated, then sighed. "It means nothing about this dog is normal. His muscle density is incredible. His heart rate is stronger than any domestic breed I've seen. His reflexes," she shook her head. "And last night, a puppy shouldn't be capable of that. Not even a fully grown dog." Evan swallowed, throat tight. "So what is he?" Dr. Collins stared at Shadow, her voice quieting. "If I didn't know better, I'd say he's not a normal breed. Not any breed. There are anomalies in his genetics. Things I can't explain." A cold shiver crept up Evan's spine. Shadow pressed a paw against Evan's wrist, as if sensing his fear. As if trying to calm him, Dr. Collins's eyes softened. He's bonded to you, Evan. I don't know how or why, but he sees you as more than an owner. You're his anchor. That word again, anchor. Evan didn't fully understand it. Not yet. But he knew one thing. Whatever Shadow was, whatever secrets he carried, Evan couldn't let anyone take him. Not scientists. Not the government. Not whoever sent the men who broke into his home. Dr. Collins stepped closer. Lowering her voice, Evan, you need to be careful. If the wrong people find out what this dog can do, they won't ask for him. They'll take him. Shadow's head lifted, eyes locking onto hers with a sharp, knowing intensity. The vet inhaled sharply. He understands us, she whispered. Evan wrapped Shadow back into the blanket, heart pounding. I'm not losing him, he said quietly, no matter what. As he carried Shadow out the door, he didn't see the figure watching him from across the street, but Shadow did, and his eyes glowed faintly just for a moment. Evan stepped out of the clinic with Shadow wrapped snugly in his arms. The blanket pulled tight around the pup as if the thin fabric could somehow shield him from the world. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, throwing long shadows across the quiet street. But something about the air felt wrong. Not cold. Not dangerous. Just watched. Shadow sensed it too. The tiny pup lifted his head from Evan's chest, ears twitching. His body stiffened, muscles tightening beneath the blanket. Those luminous eyes, usually soft around Evan, narrowed sharply, scanning the area with a precision that sent chills rushing up Evan's spine. What is it? Evan whispered. Shadow didn't look at him. He stared across the street. Evan followed the gaze and saw someone standing beside a parked black SUV. The figure leaned casually against the door, pretending to scroll through a phone. But his face wasn't illuminated. By the screen, he wasn't scrolling. He was watching. Evan's heart dropped into his stomach. He clutched Shadow tighter and quickly walked to his car. The figure didn't move, but his gaze followed them slow, studying. Calculating. Evan fumbled with his keys, shoved Shadow onto the passenger seat, and locked the doors the second he was inside. His breathing was shallow, panicked. Shadow didn't break eye contact with the man. Not until Evan drove away. The ride home was tense, each turn sending Evan's eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Every dark-colored car made his pulse spike. Every set of headlights felt too close. Shadow sat perfectly still in the seat, staring out the window with an alertness that felt almost unnerving. When they finally reached the apartment, Evan locked the door what was left of it and pushed a chair beneath the broken handle. The splintered wood still told the story of the night. Before, the memory sent a shiver through him. Shadow padded through the living room, sniffing every corner, inspecting the doorframe, pacing restlessly. His fur bristled slightly. He didn't feel safe. Neither did Evan. Finally, Shadow hopped onto the couch, pawing at Evan's arm until he sat down beside him. The pup curled into his lap and pressed his paw against Evan's chest, a gesture that had become their silent language. I'm here. Stay close. Don't be afraid. Evan exhaled shakily. You knew someone was watching us, didn't you? Shadow didn't blink, didn't move, but his stillness was an answer all on its own. Later that night, the fear finally cracked into something heavier. Questions. Who were the men who broke in? Why were they after him? Or were they after Shadow? Dr. Collins's warning echoed through his mind. If the wrong people find out, they won't ask. They'll take him. Evan ran a hand through his hair. Everything was spiraling too fast. Shadow lifted his head, sensing his distress. He climbed onto Evan's chest, placing a paw gently against his heart. The touch instantly soothed him, grounding him in a way he couldn't explain. You're not just guessing how I feel, Evan whispered. You know? Shadow's eyes softened, but then they flickered. Just for a moment, a faint glow. Barely visible, but real Evan's breath caught. He stared, afraid to even blink. Shadow closed his eyes and pressed himself closer, as if trying to hide the glow, as if trying not to scare him. Evan whispered, voice trembling, "What are you trying to protect me from?" A sudden sound cut through the room. Tap. Evan jumped. Another tap. Not from outside the door. From the window, slow, deliberate. Shadow's head snapped toward the sound, body stiffening. He growled a deep, low rumble that made Evan's blood run cold. Evan swallowed hard and crept toward the window. Pulling back the curtain by a sliver, his stomach dropped. A drone hovered just feet away, silent. Black, its camera pointed directly at his apartment. Shadow barked one sharp. Furious, powerful. The drone jerked back, as if startled, and zipped upward into the night sky before disappearing completely. Evan stumbled away from the window, heart pounding out of control. Someone was watching. Someone knew. Someone was searching. Shadow climbed onto his lap again, nudging his chin with a soft whine. Evan wrapped his arms around him tightly. "I won't let them take you," he whispered. "Whatever you are, you're mine. And I'll protect you too." Shadow pressed his forehead against Evan's chest, but his eyes, they glowed just for a heartbeat, as if saying, "You won't have to protect me. I'll protect you." The drone incident didn't just scare Evan. Shattered every illusion that their life could return to anything resembling normal. That night, after the drone vanished into the clouds, Evan closed every curtain in the apartment and turned off every light except a small lamp on the table. Shadow stayed close, his body pressed against Evan's leg, growling softly at every faint sound, every gust of wind, every distant honk, every shifting shadow on the wall. Evan sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. His mind buzzed with fear and questions. How long have they been watching? Why are they after you, Shadow? What do they know that I don't? Shadow lifted a paw and gently laid it on Evan's knee, as if reminding him, "You're not alone." Evan inhaled shakily, pulling the pup into his arms. He had never been the one to cling, never the type to show vulnerability, but something about Shadow made him feel safe enough to break apart. "Whoever they are," Evan whispered, voice trembling, "they're not getting you, okay? I won't let them." Shadow's tail tapped lightly against his stomach. But his eyes, they didn't hold fear. They held certainty, as if he was the one reassuring Yvonne. The other way around. The following morning, Evan woke with a weight on his chest. Shadow had fallen asleep curled against him, his body tense even in slumber, as though guarding him through the night. When Evan stood up, Shadow stood immediately. "Ready?" Evan noticed. "You always know when I'm about to move," he murmured. "Why? How?" Shadow tilted his head. A gesture that was too human. Evan sighed. He couldn't stay in the apartment. Not with broken doors. Not with watchers outside. He needed answers. Real answers. And only one person he knew might help him understand the impossible, Dr. Collins. But even as he reached for his keys, he froze. Was it safe to leave? What if the watchers followed them again? What if someone grabbed Shadow while he wasn't looking? Shadow sensed his hesitation. The pup nudged his leg, pressing both tiny paws against Evan's shin, looking up with wide, determined eyes. "Trust me." The eyes seemed to say. Evan knelt down, gripping Shadow gently by the face. "You trust me," he whispered. "So I'm going to trust you too." The drive to the clinic felt like walking through a dream, an anxious dream that refused to let him breathe. Every car behind him felt suspicious. Every pedestrian's gaze felt too long when they arrived. Evan slipped quietly through the door, head down, Shadow tucked securely inside his jacket. Dr. Collins saw him instantly. Her smile faded. "Evan." What happened? He didn't bother with small talk. There was a drone at my window, he started, voice tight. Last night. Watching us. Dr. Collins's face paled. Did they see the puppy do anything? I don't know, Evan whispered. I don't know who they are. I just need answers. She nodded slowly. Come to the exam room. Shadow didn't resist as she ran tests, blood work, reflex checks. Scans, though Evan noticed something strange. Shadow watched everything she did. Not nervously. Not VRFULLY. Strategically. Calculating. Almost like. Evaluating her after the tests, Dr. Collins sat across from Evan, hands folded, voice heavy. Evan, his DNA doesn't match any domestic breed. Or wolf. Or coyote. Or anything. Evan swallowed hard. So what is he? Her eyes softened with something like fear or awe. I don't know, she whispered. But he's not just an animal. There's neural activity patterns we don't see in dogs. Evan felt cold. Patterns like what? He asked. She hesitated. Then said softly, patterns similar to human emotional recognition. Advanced problem solving, anticipation, memory. Evan stared at Shadow. Shadow stared back. And for the first time, Evan didn't see a puppy. He saw something else, something ancient. Intelligent, protective. Dr. Collins leaned in. Voice low. Evan, whatever he is, he wasn't born in the wild. He wasn't bred by accident. She paused. He was made. Evan felt his heart stop. Made, he whispered. Her eyes darted to the window as if expecting someone to be listening. Someone created him, she said. And they're looking for him. They will not stop. Shadow leaped onto Evan's lap, growling softly at the door as footsteps passed outside. Evan wrapped his arms around him tightly. They can't have him, he said. Not now. Not ever. Shadow pressed his head to Evan's chest and closed his eyes. But behind the closed lids, a faint glow flickered, like something awakening, like something preparing. Evan left the clinic with a weight crushing his chest so heavily it felt like every breath had to be fought for. Shadow sat in his lap the whole drive home, small but alert, every muscle in his body taut. The pup kept his gaze fixed on the windows, not on the scenery, but on the reflections, watching for threats. Evan didn't know if that made him feel safer or more terrified. Dr. Collins's words replayed in his mind on a constant loop. He wasn't born. He wasn't bred. He was made. Made by who? Made for what? Shadow pressed a paw against Evan's chest, grounding him as always. But this time, even that gentle touch couldn't steady his shaking hands. When they reached the apartment building, Evan carried Shadow up the stairs, avoiding the elevator. Avoiding cameras, avoiding everything that felt like eyes. His heartbeat thundered in his ears with every step. When he turned the corner toward his floor, he froze. A man stood at the end of the hallway, tall, still, dressed in a long black coat. Hands clasped behind his back, waiting. Evan's breath caught. Shadow stiffened instantly. A low growl rippling out of his chest, sound deeper than anything. That should come from a creature his size. The man didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, as though studying them the way a scientist might study a rare specimen. Good evening, Evan, the man said quietly. Evan's blood ran cold. He didn't know this man. He hadn't given him his name. But the stranger spoke it with unsettling certainty. Evan clutched Shadow tighter. Who are you? The man smiled slightly. Not warm. Not friendly. Calculated. I'm someone who's been looking for your pup. Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating against Evan's chest like distant thunder. The man's eyes flicked to Shadow, and his smile widened, thin and cold. Ah, there he is. Subject 9. Evan felt his knees weaken. Subject, what? You picked up something that belongs to us, the man said calmly. And we'll be taking him back now. Evan stumbled a step backward, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. No, he whispered. You're not taking him. The man's voice remained eerily composed. You do not understand what he is. He's dangerous, unpredictable, a weapon that should never have left containment. Shadow barked sharp, furious. The lights in the hallway flickered. The man raised an eyebrow. Interesting. His synchronization with you is ahead of projections. Evan shook his head violently. He's not a weapon. He saved me. He feels things. He understands. He was engineered too. The man interrupted coldly. That emotional bond you're clinging to? It was designed, manufactured. A tactical bonding instinct. Nothing more. Shadow snarled so loudly the sound echoed off the walls. Evan felt sick. Not because he believed the man, but because the man believed every word he said. I'm not giving him to you, Evan said, voice trembling but firm. The man sighed. You don't have a choice. He isn't yours. He was never meant to be in the civilian world. He took one step forward. Shadow reacted instantly, his tiny body tensed like a primed spring. Stay where you are, Evan snapped. The man paused, but only for a moment. That dog is not a pet, he said softly. He is the culmination of years of research and billions of dollars. You cannot imagine what he's capable of, Evan. You cannot imagine what will happen if he stays with you. Evan held Shadow protectively, heart pounding. I don't care what he was made for, he whispered. He's mine now. The man's expression shifted just slightly. Annoyance. Resignation that is unfortunate, he muttered. He reached into his coat. Shadow tensed. Evan's breath seized. Then the man pulled something out, a small black device. He clicked it instantly. Shadow yelped, not loudly, but painfully, his body jolting in Evan's arms as though struck by something invisible. Evan panicked, clutching him tightly as Shadow trembled. Eyes glowing faintly, fighting something Evan couldn't see. What are you doing to him? Evan shouted. The man didn't answer. Shadow whimpered, but then slowly the whimper changed. It deepened, darkened, shifted into a growl so powerful it vibrated in Evan's bones. The hallway lights flickered. Violently the man frowned. That shouldn't be happening. Shadow's eyes snapped open, burning, bright, unnatural, glowing as though lit from within. The man stepped back. Evan whispered, voice cracking, Shadow. Shadow leaped from Evan's arms with a force Evan had never seen. Landing between him and the man, body low, every muscle coiled. He wasn't trembling anymore. He was transforming. The man raised the device. Again, but Shadow lunged faster than a bullet, faster than the man could blink. The device clattered across the hallway. The man stumbled backward, eyes wide for the first time. Shadow stood between Evan and the stranger, chest heaving, eyes burning like embers of something ancient and awakened. The man whispered, impossible. Shadow bared his teeth. Evan, trembling, whispered, let's go. Shadow didn't look away from the man, but he moved backward, slowly guarding Evan with every step until they reached the stairwell. Then they ran. They didn't know where. They didn't know what came next, but they knew one truth. Shadow wasn't just made. He was waking up, and whatever was inside him was done hiding. Evan had never run so fast in his life. He tore down the stairwell with Shadow tucked against his chest, heart pounding so violently he could barely hear anything but the thunder of his own footsteps. Every turn, every corner felt like it might reveal the man in the black coat, or, worse, more like him. Shadow's body was tense, alert, but not trembling. His eyes burned with a faint, unsettling glow that seemed to pulse with every breath. He wasn't panicked. He was ready to. Evan, however, felt like he was falling apart when they reached the ground floor. He pressed his back to the wall and listened. Gasping for air, footsteps echoed somewhere. Above them, slow, controlled, the man in the black coat wasn't running. He didn't have to. He knew Evan would run. He knew where Evan lived, and he knew Evan had nowhere else to go. Shadow growled low in Evan's arms, sensing the fear trembling under Evan's skin. That growl's a deep one. The one that didn't belong in a creature his size vibrated through Evan's ribs. Evan tightened his grip. Okay. We need to move. They burst through the back exit of the apartment building and stumbled into the alleyway. The cold wind slapped Evan's face, but he barely felt it. He looked around wildly. Where could they go? Who could they trust? Was anyone safe to call? His eyes darted across the dim alley. Shadow twisted in his arms, staring intensely at something. What? What is it? Shadow wriggled free and landed with a grace too perfect for a tiny pup. He sprinted toward the far end of the alley, stopping only to glance back, waiting for Evan to follow. Evan ran. He didn't think. He just trusted Shadow's instincts. When they reached the street, Evan spotted his car, but dozens of people moved along the sidewalks. And the black SUV he'd seen earlier that day was still parked across the street. Evan froze. No, they're still here. Shadow barked once, sharp, commanding. He ran again, but not toward the car. He darted into a narrow pedestrian walkway between two buildings. Evan followed, lungs burning, shoes slapping against wet pavement at the end of the walkway. Evan expected a dead end, but instead, the space opened onto a quiet, abandoned construction site. Half-built steel beams rose into the foggy sky like bones of a forgotten giant. Shadow slowed, his ears twitching. Evan crouched beside him, whispering, "Are they following?" Shadow's gaze flicked upward toward the street behind them, and then Evan heard it. The distant hum of an engine. A door closing. A faint metallic clack like a weapon being readied. Evan's heart sank. They're coming. Shadow stepped in front of him once more, small but unmoving, fearless. Evan felt tears blur his vision. "I can't let them take you," he whispered. "I won't." Shadow pressed his forehead against Evan's knee for a brief second to silent promise. A silent thank you, then turned back toward the entrance. Evan saw it happen before. Shadow even moved. The glow returned, not faint this time, a burning. Steady pulse behind Shadow's eyes, something awake, aware, old. Evan's breath hitched in his throat. "Shadow, what's happening to you?" But Shadow didn't look back. He crouched low, guarding, protecting. Evan realized something terrifying. Shadow wasn't afraid of the men coming for them. He was preparing for them. A voice echoed from the walkway behind them. "Evan," the cold voice called gently, almost taunting. "You can't run forever." Evan grabbed a metal pipe from the ground, his hands shaking violently. "Stay back," he shouted. Footsteps grew closer. Shadow's growl deepened. Evan's heart sank as the man in the black coat stepped into view, calm, flawless, unhurried. Two more men flanked him. Shadow stretched his body low to the ground, hackles rising like blades. The man sighed softly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "Give us the asset." Evan clenched his jaw. He's not an asset. He's family. For the first time, the man's expression changed. "Not anger, pity, you don't understand," he said quietly. "He was never meant to feel. That bond he has to you, it's not real." Shadow barked a sharp, furious sound that echoed off the steel beams like a warning shot. The man lifted a hand. "Take them." Everything happened at once. Boots pounding. Shadows rushing. Evan shouting. Shadow lunging forward with a snarl so powerful it shook Evan's bones, and then a blast of light. A surge of heat. A shockwave of force that knocked Evan backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping, and when he looked up, Shadow wasn't just glowing, he was transforming, not in shape, not in size, but in presence. Empowered, Evan whispered, trembling, "What? Are you?" Shadow turned his head slightly, eyes burning brighter than ever. Shadow turned his head slightly, eyes burning brighter than ever, and for the first time since Evan had found him, he looked almost human. The construction site trembled beneath Evan's palms as he pushed himself upright. Dust swirling in the air like smoke after an explosion. His ears rang. His chest burned. And somewhere in that haze of confusion and fear, one thought cut through everything: Shadow. He blinked rapidly, eyes adjusting to the faint light between the steel beams. And then he saw him. Shadow stood several feet away, small, unbroken, but radiating a heat Evan could feel even from a distance. The faint glow in his eyes had intensified into something fierce, something primal, something awakened. Evan whispered shakily, "Shadow." Shadow didn't respond. He stared forward at the men approaching, the ones who had hunted him, the ones calling him Subject 9, the ones who believed he was a weapon. The man in the black coat looked stunned, truly stunned. "This is impossible," he muttered, taking an involuntary step back. His two men raised weapon-sleek black devices that hummed faintly with a high pitch. Not guns. Something far worse. Shadow lowered his stance, not like a frightened animal, like a predator preparing for its first kill. "No." Evan shouted, "Shadow, stop." But Shadow didn't move from his protective line. His gaze locked onto the men, muscles tightening as the humming devices crackled with energy. "Detain him," the man ordered. The two agents fired. A ripple of blue energy erupted toward Shadow, crackling through the air and struck him directly. Evan cried out in horror as Shadow's body jolted, glowing veins sparking across his small frame. But he did not fall. Instead, Shadow lifted his head and growled. Not a puppy's growl, not even a wolf's. A sound so deep and resonant it shook the steel beams above them. The men hesitated. "What is he?" One whispered, voice cracking. Shadow took a single step forward, and the air around him shifted. For a heartbeat, Evan swore the ground pulsed beneath Shadow's paws. Light, thin, faint, but real, spread outward like ripples. A shockwave burst from the tiny pup. The agents were thrown backward as if hit by a blast of wind. Weapons flew from their hands, skidding across the concrete. Shadow didn't chase them. He stood firmly in front of Evan, legs braced, eyes locked on the man in the black coat. Evan pushed himself up, breathless. "Shadow, enough. Please, enough." Shadow's ears twitched at Evan's voice, slowly, very slowly. The glow in his eyes dimmed, but the man in the black coat wasn't finished. He rose to his feet, wiped blood from his lip, and glared at Evan with hatred so cold it made the air feel thin. "You have no idea what you're protecting," he spat. That creature saved my life," Evan snapped. "You don't understand," the man hissed. He wasn't built to protect people. He was engineered for control, for infiltration, for silent elimination. His loyalty protocol bonds him to the first human he sees at a critical moment of survival. Evan's stomach twisted. "No," Evan whispered. "He cares. He feels." The man shook his head. "You think he loves you? You think any of this is real? It's an imprint, a program. And if we don't retrieve him, if we don't contain him, he will become unstable, dangerous. Shadow growled again. Stepping between them, the man raised a hand. Fine, you won't listen. He whistled sharply, and from behind the half-built scaffolding, more figures emerged. Black coats, gloved hands, weapons humming with deadly quiet energy. Evan's breath caught in his throat. 6. No 7. Shadow stiffened, eyes glowing once more. No, Evan whispered. Shadow, don't fight them. You'll get hurt. But Shadow didn't move. He wasn't preparing to attack. He was preparing to choose. His gaze shifted between Evan and the approaching agents. For the first time, fear flashed inside the pup's glowing eyes, not fear for himself, but fear for Evan. The man in the black coat pointed forward. Take him. And if the civilian interferes, neutralize him. Shadow let out a sound Evan had never heard before. Mix of a cry and a snarl. A sound that tore through the air like a warning from something ancient. And then Shadow turned to Evan. He nudged his leg gently, softly, as if saying goodbye. No, Evan whispered, tears burning his eyes. No, don't you dare. Don't you leave me? More agents closed in. Shadow stepped forward. Lowering his head, light began to gather around him. Bright, growing, blinding. Shadow. Please, Evan cried. But it was too late. Shadow unleashed a storm of power. Evan had never imagined, never believed exploded outward, and everything turned white. Asterisk. The world went silent. Blinding white light swallowed everything, the agents, the steel beams above them, the cold night air. Evan shielded his face with his arms, knees hitting the concrete as a violent wind tore through the construction site. It roared around him like a storm trapped inside a cage finally breaking free, and in the middle of that storm, Shadow stood small, defiant, glowing brighter than the moon overhead. Evan couldn't see the men any more, only silhouettes tumbling backward, thrown like rag dolls across the ground. Shouts blurred together beneath the roar of energy, fading into terrified screams, then dashed silence. The light died down slowly, shrinking into a soft shimmer around Shadow's small frame. Evan blinked through the haze, heart pounding as colors and shapes began to return. Bodies lay scattered around the agents, unconscious. Weapons dead and sparking. The man in the black coat crawled onto his elbows, staring at Shadow with a look that wasn't just fear. It was disbelief, as if the creature he helped create had just rewritten its own purpose. Shadow stepped back toward Evan, the glow in his eyes flickering with exhaustion. His legs shook. His breaths came unevenly. Evan lunged forward and scooped him into his arms. Shadow, Shadow, I've got you. I'm here. The pup whimpered softly, his body weak from the blast. He pressed his tiny head against Evan's chest, breathing shallowly but deliberately, as if making sure Evan was still there, still safe. Evan's vision blurred with tears. You saved me again, he whispered, his voice cracking. But why? Why risk yourself like that? Shadow's glowing eyes gazed up at him, and in them, Evan saw something the man in the black coat said could never exist. Emotion, attachment, love, not programmed, not engineered, real. The man in the black coat staggered to his feet, holding his ribs. You fool, he growled. Do you have any idea what he just did? The energy output, the instability. You'll both die if he loses control again. Evan held Shadow tighter and stood. We're leaving. You can't protect him, the man shouted. He's a weapon, an unstable one. If he stays with you, he'll burn out. He'll crash. Shadow growled weakly in Evan's arms. Evan didn't look back. Then we'll find a way, he said. Together. He ran through the twisted scaffolding, through the dusty air, through the fog-covered streets. He didn't stop. Not until the construction site became a distant, dying shadow behind them. Only then, under a lone streetlight, Evan sank to his knees, cradling Shadow against him. Shadow's breathing steadied, not perfectly, not fully, but enough. "Hey," Evan whispered softly. "Stay with me, okay? Please." Shadow's eyes flickered once. Then his tiny paw touched Evan's chest. "Okay." Over his heart, Evan felt something warm flood through him. Subtle but powerful connection, a bond not born from a lab or protocol. But from every moment they survived together, every fear, every danger, every breath they had fought to keep, Evan pressed his forehead to Shadow's. "They were wrong about you," he whispered. "You're not a weapon. You're not an experiment." He hugged him close. "You're my family." Shadow let out a soft, sound half-sigh, half-whimper, as if answering. "And you're mine?" Days later, Evan didn't return to his apartment. He disappeared. He took Shadow somewhere no one would look, a small place beyond the reach of any agency or hunter. He learned how to care for Shadow's power, how to calm him, how to keep him grounded and Shadow. He grew stronger, smarter, more protective, but also softer around Evan, resting his head on Evan's lap every night, reminding him that even in a world that had tried to claim him as a weapon, he chose love instead. And every time Evan looked into those strange, luminous eyes, he felt grateful for one truth. Sometimes the things we fear the most are the ones sent to save us, and sometimes the family we find is more powerful than anything someone else could ever create. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe for more inspiring stories. And if you have any questions or want to know what happened next with the characters, just comment below. I'll be reading them all and give you a reply.